The fraternity of superstar athletes who never managed to win a championship is a big one. Charles Barkley, Barry Bonds, Dan Marino, Connor McDavid. I could go on forever. One name that isn't on that list though? Ray Bourque. Instead, thanks to his remarkable longevity and even more remarkable resolve, Bourque capped his astonishing career with a storybook ending that made him more than just a Hall of Famer. It made him a champion. Look, it's impossible to overstate how legendary Ray Bourque was. He was essentially the second coming of Bobby Orr, a defenseman with extraordinary offensive prowess who broke in with the Boston Bruins as a teenager and eventually became a franchise icon and an all-time NHL great. Over his 2-decade stint in Boston, Bourque averaged a point per game as a defenseman, earning himself a Calder Trophy in 1979-1980, 19 All-Star nominations, and 5 Norris Trophies. No defenseman in NHL history has more All-Star nods, by the way, and only 3 have more Norris Trophies, including Orr. And by the time he retired, Bourque had more goals and points than any other defenseman. His resume, in other words, was as impressive as it gets, but for the longest time, there was one thing missing. See, as electrifying and consistent as Bourque was in Boston, the ultimate prize continually eluded him. The Bruins were a damn good team for virtually all of Bourque's time there, and even made the playoffs in each of his first 17 seasons in Boston, but inevitably, they came up short of a championship. On 2 occasions, they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, but in both 1988 and 1990, the Bruins were bested by the Edmonton Oilers. In fact, over those 2 trips to the Big Dance, the Bruins won 1 game total. And by the turn of the century, a decade later, the Bruins were still chasing their first Stanley Cup title since '72. Meanwhile, Bourque was pushing 40. Actually, in 1999-2000, his 21st NHL season, Bourque was the 3rd oldest player in the NHL. He no longer had time to mess around. If he was going to check the one outstanding box on his Hall of Fame resume, it had to happen now. Problem is, the Bruins came out flat. Real flat. The Bruins didn't win their first game in 1999-2000 until 3 weeks into the season. And although they did manage to pull themselves out of that early rut, injuries and inconsistency had them hovering around 500 for most of the season. It was abundantly clear, in other words, that this team was not a serious Stanley Cup contender, despite Bourque's best efforts. The 39-year-old put up 38 points in 65 games for the Bruins while averaging more minutes per game than any other player on the roster. But with Boston going nowhere and his proverbial clock ticking, Bourque did something he had never done before. The most fiercely loyal player in franchise history, the Bruins' all-time leader in games played, requested a trade. That February, Bourque asked Bruins general manager Harry Linden to send him to a Stanley Cup contender. Ideally, one not too far from his Boston home. His dream destination, believe it or not, was Philadelphia, and Linden did his best to accommodate his franchise icon. He reportedly solicited trade offers from 5 contenders, the Flyers included. But when the dust finally settled in early March, Bourque didn't find himself in Philly, or even in the Northeast. Instead, Linden ended up sending the future Hall of Famer to the Colorado Avalanche, the franchise that had transformed into a juggernaut and even won a Stanley Cup in the half-decade since relocating from Quebec City. Colorado may not have been Bourque's first choice, but his fit with the Avs was nothing short of perfect. In fact, the Avs were so delighted to have Bourque that franchise icon Joe Sakic offered to cede his longtime captaincy to the 39-year-old legend. Bourque, of course, graciously refused. He didn't need the accolades or the recognition. He just wanted to win a Stanley Cup, and it sure looked like they were going to. Bourque's arrival transformed the Avs from a Stanley Cup contender into a Stanley Cup favorite. With Bourque in the lineup, the Avs were almost unbeatable down the stretch, going 12-2-1 following the midseason blockbuster to lock up first place in the Northwest Division. For his part, Bourque notched 14 points in 14 games with Colorado, igniting their power play and generally solidifying an already strong defensive core. And as the Avalanche bullied their way through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, it looked like Bourque was going to get his fairy tale ending. Except he wasn't. For a second year in a row, the Avalanche ran into the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Finals, and for a second year in a row, Colorado found themselves on the losing end of a decisive Game 7. And it would have been completely understandable if Bourque had called it quits at that point. After 21 fruitless seasons, maybe a Stanley Cup ring just wasn't in the cards for Bourque, who, by the way, wasn't under contract anymore. But damn it if the dude wasn't determined. Less than 3 weeks after the Avalanche were eliminated, Bourque re-upped with Colorado, agreeing to a 1-year contract to attend to, as he put it, some unfinished business. And even at the age of 40, Bourque could still play. In 2000-2001, Bourque turned in his most productive season in a half-decade, finishing tied for third among all defensemen with 59 points, while appearing in all but 2 of Colorado's regular season games. For his efforts, he finished just shy of a 6th Norris Trophy, finishing second in voting behind Nicklas Lidstrom. And with Bourque playing at that level for an already extremely talented roster, the Avalanche were definitively the league's best team in 2000-2001. Colorado set a then-franchise record with 52 wins that season, locking up first place in the Western Conference with ease. This was undeniably the best team that Bourque had ever played on. This was the team of destiny. All they had to do now was not lose. That was easy enough in the first round of the playoffs. The Avs swept the Vancouver Canucks in 4 games, exploding for 16 goals in the series. However, Colorado nearly imploded in round 2. The Avalanche squandered a 3-1 series lead against the LA Kings to force a Game 7, but ultimately avoided a full-on collapse. Colorado won 5-1 in the do-or-die Game 7, which also featured Bourque's only 2 points of the series. But with a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals on the line in the following round, the old man went off. Bourque scored 3 goals and added 3 assists in the Western Conference Finals, powering the Avalanche past the St. Louis Blues in 5 games to punch their ticket to the big dance. For the first time in 11 years, and just the 3rd time in his singular career, Bourque was going to the Stanley Cup Finals. He was now 4 wins away from the prize he'd been chasing for 22 years and from the picture-perfect final chapter to his career. The only problem? The New Jersey Devils. The reigning Stanley Cup champs had their sights set on a repeat. And they not only had the league's most prolific offense, but also the winningest goalie in NHL history between the pipes. This was, in other words, a true clash of the Titans, one that featured a total of 7 future Hall of Famers. And to this day, the 0-1 Finals remains arguably the most compelling Stanley Cup showdown of the 21st century. Because, holy crap, what a showdown it was. The Avalanche took Game 1, comfortably. The Devils took Game 2, barely. Colorado won Game 3. Actually, Bourque scored the game winner. New Jersey won Game 4. Yeah, these 2 juggernauts were evenly matched. But in the pivotal Game 5 in Colorado, the Devils took control of the series, taking a 3-2 lead in the best-of-7 and putting the Avalanche on the ropes with a 4-1 victory. Bourque was now 1 loss away from that all-too-familiar heartbreak, and in all likelihood, the final gutting blow of his career. But that didn't happen. Instead, with their backs against the walls, the Avs stormed back in Game 6, cruising to a 4-0 victory to stave off elimination and force a Game 7. This was it. 1 game for all the marbles. And, presumably, the last game of Bourque's career, win or lose. I mean, it would have been hard for Bourque to come back for another kick at the can at 41 years old after coming so excruciatingly close. In the end, however, there was no need for Bourque to return for a 23rd NHL season. The Avalanche made sure of that. Less than 8 minutes into Game 7, Colorado was on the board, courtesy of Alex Tanguay.
Centered shot, score! Tanguay, 1-0!
And the Avs just didn't look back. Early in the second period, Tanguay was at it again.
Joe Sakic, a move, shot, save, open net, score! He's done it again! Alex Tanguay!
And not even 90 seconds later, the Avs went up 3-0.
On the power play, Sakic fakes it, takes it, scores! Joe Sakic, power play goal! 3-0 Colorado!
It was all over but the crying. The Devils trimmed their deficit to 2 with just over 10 minutes remaining in the second period, but it never got closer than that. And as New Jersey tried in vain to mount a third period comeback, it became increasingly inevitable that Bourque, who took more shifts than any other Colorado player in Game 7, would at long last be a champion.
10 seconds left to go. The countdown. Cleared out of the zone. The Colorado Avalanche have won the Stanley Cup. Raymond Bourque, a dream has come true.
After 22 seasons in the NHL, 1,826 career games, a dream had indeed come true for Ray Bourque. No other Stanley Cup champion had ever waited so long before finally lifting the cup. And so when Sakic, Colorado's captain, was handed the cup by Commissioner Gary Bettman, he couldn't in good conscience be the first player to hoist it.
Joe Sakic will come out to receive it as captain. The Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche. And after 22 years, Raymond Bourque!
In that moment, 22 years of frustration evaporated. The box had been checked. Like virtually every other player in NHL history with more than 1,550 career points, Bourque would have his name inscribed on the Stanley Cup. It was the perfect ending. A goodbye as glorious as hockey has ever seen. And sure enough, that fateful game was indeed the last one of Bourque's career. Not even 3 weeks later, Bourque announced his retirement. And today, almost a quarter century on, Bourque remains hockey's definitive symbol of perseverance. A legend who refused to be remembered as anything less than a champion. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button.